Me. I'm Mahdi Shaheeb Sher. My website is www.shaheeb.com. I think one of my interests in the world is democracy and America, gun violence, and the death penalty in America as well. I think we do have contradictions in democracy when we look at democracy, but also issues of gun crime, gun violence, and gun crime, and the death penalty as well. I think these two issues of gun crime and the death penalty in America run contrary to the whole idea and principle of democracy. I think principle is the protection of life and its freedom. And I think when you have issues of the death penalty and gun crime, then you are introducing, I think, factors that are kind of derogatory to the whole idea of democracy. I think factors that are perhaps demeaning but very much unjustified towards the uh, the principle that is democracy. Democracy, I think, is a far-reaching idea that encompasses much of government around the world, and it's a predominant form of government and a system of government throughout the world. So I think that when you have instances of social collapse and social decay or social unrest, like a gun crime and the death penalty. These are instances of social discord or social problems which seep into public life. And I think these social problems do create a very large ripple effect of a disturbance. So I think that these social problems are unfortunately a great threat and danger to democracy. I think if you look at the challenges that democracy is facing around the world, it is enjoying quite a lot of success in that it has achieved a lot of its kind of groundwork with much of the world. But I think that when you do examine some of the problems and challenges facing democracy, then some of these challenges could be seen as social problems. And some of these social problems, I think, consist of instances of gun crime and death penalty, especially in the number one democracy of the world, which is America. I think when you examine America and American democracy, there is a great expectation and a great promise of freedom, liberty, and equality, that every person has his own right to happiness and freedom, and he has his liberty to pursue all aspects of life without restriction and without harm, free and peacefully. And I think these are great, great ideas and great principles that people can aim for and satisfy themselves with in life. So I think that these things are quite important. And I think democracy does very well to at least vocalize that these principles do exist. And I think that alone is a great accomplishment and a great achievement. That democracy does place in its kind of luggage the whole idea that people do deserve quality of life. They do deserve peace and respect and a dignity of life. There is a promise of um, freedom and happiness as well. So I think that these are very important aspects to an individual and his whole idea of individualism, his place in the world, and his peace and happiness in the world, that he can find himself just in accord with the rest of the world. He can find his place within the world, and he can feel quite content and purposeful within the world as well. And I think these are very valuable issues that we can deal with democracy and how it develops with the government throughout the world. And I think that when we do have instances of gun crime and the death penalty, then we do need to examine quite closely these instances of social problems and find solutions to the origin of these problems and perhaps solutions to the problems themselves as well. With instances of death penalty, especially, I think that it is very contradictory to democracy. That we have an instance in America where they do offer people freedom and happiness, or the promise of it. Yet, at the same instance, they have to provide also the death penalty. And I think with this death penalty, they take away life, which is actually more severe than the promise of democracy itself and the promise of freedom. That to actually take away life itself, I think it is more of a serious offence than actually not to have freedom or happiness at all. So I think that there is some kind of imbalance with priorities and values of how we can have a death penalty where people are through their own circumstances, and there may be individual circumstances, very aggravated or mitigating circumstances, but certainly aggravated circumstances where individuals may have lost control for an instance or may not have the right recourse to command a situation or to deal with a situation um, as best as possible. But I think that when people do find themselves in an unfortunate situation and at a loss with a situation, and they find themselves faced with a death penalty, then it is slightly unjustified and a very harsh penalty to have to pay for a lapse of judgment, which, by all accords, can be a natural biological condition of a person. Have some kind of a suffrage of a lapse of judgment, which happens to the best of individuals. So I think when we do have these social problems of death penalty and also death penalty and also gun crime as well, then we are looking at social problems which could suggest that there are underlying problems with democracy and its the way that it's propping itself up. And I think that's also quite important. I think the death penalty is something that is very much concentrated in a few countries around the world. I don't think it's very widespread because many countries in the world appreciate that the death penalty is very severe, it's very strict, and it's punitive on termination as well. It's punitive on termination, which I think suggests that there's no option or recourse to put right something if it's become extinct. So I think that there's no recourse to redress or to put things right, and I think that's very crucial and very important. I think that's a very crucial notion to appreciate that things actually should always have a recourse to readdress, to readdress, so that things should always be put right if things do go wrong. And we should never be in a situation where if things do go wrong, then there's no redress at all. That unfortunately the problem has become lost, and there has been a permanent and a terminal situation to the problem. And I think that's what we're faced with the death penalty. There's no second choice or a second decision with the death penalty. I think once you make the decision of a death penalty, that individual loses his right to life, and there's no redress to that. There's no opportunity for that life to plead his innocence any further, and there may never have been an opportunity for that person to plead his innocence if he's been handed a punishment of a death penalty. I think that could also be a case as well. And I think that's why it is important that individuals are not that they're not made to suffer a punitive damage that is very excessive and very extreme, like the death penalty. It should be perhaps proportionate to the crime itself, or perhaps just proportionate itself. And I think that's what's most important, that with instances like the death penalty, where it is taking away another life, and life is only granted by God, so it should never be taken away by another human being. But I think that when the death penalty is issued and it is carried out, then that is a very extreme and a very severe punishment, which is quite permanent, and I think some kind of a government law that allows that is kind of maybe a bad law in itself. It perhaps may not live up to the expectations of what law provides, and that is in society. So I think that law should be more all-encompassing and justified. It may be difficult to achieve that, but I think it should be justified. And I think that's what law could be. It could be justified within the proportion of things. And I think if law is justified, then it measures punishment. It doesn't hand out punishment, but it measures it. And I think with the death penalty, there has to be a debate in America as whether this is valid in not only a rogue nation, in any other part of a distant part of the world, but in the number one democracy of the world where the death penalty is very common. And I think that if other nations have argued and debated about the death penalty and have deemed it to be inappropriate towards the sanctity of life, then America should also perhaps follow up on those debates and to perhaps enter into that debate and that discussion, and perhaps resolve amongst themselves the same causes of ideas and concerns with the death penalty, and perhaps introduce some of the principles that perhaps protect life rather than take it away. So I think that's one of the important things about the death penalty, that it's not very common around the world, but it is very common in America. This runs contrary to the idea of democracy, especially when it discusses issues like freedom and happiness and quality of life for a person. I don't think a death penalty is a very good quality of life for a person. And I think that this is quite important because I think when we do live in a democratic world, then things have to be readdressed in all avenues of society, however low they are or however high they are, whichever section of society these problems come from, they must be readdressed and solved. They must be dealt with in a justified and measured approach without any extreme enforcement of law. And maybe that's the issue here, that it could be an enforcement of law rather than jurisprudence or law and jurisprudence. So I think that this is what's most important, that people do deserve some kind of dignity with the process of law. And it's not just a case of enforcement of law, but maybe the whole relationship of government and law with the person as well, with the individual. Individual is there to be served by government and law, and it's not the individual who serves the government and law, but I think the law and government serves the individual. So that's my idea about the death penalty, and I think the instances of gun violence in public places is also something that's very extreme and very unusual. I think there shouldn't be any instances or causes of concern or alarm or distress with gun violence in public places. Pedestrians have a right to 100% protection and safety and health in public in a public environment, and they should never have to fear gun violence under any circumstances, even if it's for defence as well, because defence is a secondary attribution, and if it's participating in public environment, then that should be the number one priority. It shouldn't be whether self-defense is a means to a person's necessity within the environment. What is the main issue is whether a person can participate in public environment. And that is the main issue here. And I think that's what the main concern is with gun violence. It takes away a person's number one and fundamental right to participate in the public environment. And this is obviously a very important issue. That is very important for democracy as well, but it's very important for the health of an individual, for an individual, and for his safety and his happiness and his quality of life. Everything that democracy promises actually comes from these fundamental sources of being able to access a public environment. I think when people are able to participate in the public environment and access it, then they are afforded a protection and a right of life and a dignity of life with that opportunity. So I think that is important. And unfortunately, we do have some kind of an instance of gun violence in the world, of gun crime, where it is unfortunately threatening all of that idea of participation in the public environment, for the simple means to have the right to possess or own guns or weapons. And I think this is absolutely absurd that you can take away a fundamental right for the excuse of a privilege or a luxury or a means of an occupation or something. So I think that this is very slightly concerning. It doesn't seem very logical. And I think that that should be considered as well with gun crime. So that's my views about gun crime and the death penalty and how it sits with democracy. Thank you very much.